What impact, if any, will new Mariners offensive coordinator Brant Brown have on roster building this offseason? And why haven't the M's traded Bryce Miller or Bryan Woo yet? We'll answer all that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Mariners. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. This is Tiding Gonzalez and Colby Badnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's LOCKEDON to get yourself started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. It is Mailbag Monday on a Tuesday. Let's see what you guys want to know. We got a couple of questions here about new Mariners offensive coordinator Brant Brown. We're going to answer both of them together. The first one here comes from Tom. Do you think people are overrating, underrating, or accurately rating the chances of Brant Brown being brought onto the coaching staff, helping us in our pursuit of Jorge Soler? And secondly, from Daisy and the Dingo, do you think that part of Brant Brown's role with the M's is to assist the front office with major league personnel decisions? It's been an area they've seemed to lack in recently, and it seems to be an offseason where they've taken a complete 180-degree turn and hitting philosophy. All right, so to answer the first question, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know if it's overrated, underrated, or properly rated. I mean, the only way that we'll know if Jorge Soler actually took Brant Brown's presence in Seattle into account and actually value that is if the Mariners actually sign him, and then in his media gathering after signing says, yeah, because Brant Brown was here, I wanted to come to Seattle. That's really it. So I don't know. It certainly doesn't hurt, right? And I'm sure that Brown, once he was brought into the fold, went to Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander, said, like, I like Jorge Soler. I like his fit, in this ballpark, and I like his fit on this ball club. After being with him down in Miami and essentially getting the most out of Soler as anyone has in Soler's career in a single season. But does that mean as much to Soler? I don't know. I'm not Jorge Soler. I don't know Jorge Soler. So I have no idea how to answer that. I would say accurately rated. I don't, but again, I have no clue. To answer the second question, I'm sure his input is being taken into account, but is he directly having an influence on the moves the Mariners will end up making this offseason whenever they decide to actually do something and add to their major league roster rather than subtract? I don't know that either. But I would say that, like with Soler, that he has probably told them about some guys that he likes. And of course, Brown's going to be the guy that puts together these offensive game plans for the Mariners in 2024. So, he should have some influence over how the offense is constructed. But that's still ultimately up to Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander and their vision in general. Do I think that Brown is going to have any impact over their hitting philosophy? I mean, in terms of the game plans, yes, like I said, because he's the one that's going to be crafting those. But in terms of like cutting down strikeouts, stuff like that, or like specific player types, who knows? I don't think so, because I mean, the whole reducing strikeout emphasis, the pivot that the Mariners have seemingly made. I mean, they haven't added a ton of guys to the roster, but they have subtracted a lot of high strikeout guys. That decision was made before Brown was brought into the fold, before they had any sort of guarantee that Brown was going to be a part of their coaching staff in 2024. So again, we have to wait and see like what kind of players they bring in, because if they bring in Jorge Soler, that's a guy that's had strikeout issues in the past. If they trade for Brent Rooker or whoever, that's that guy that has strikeout issues now. So this whole thing about reducing strikeouts might be a moot point when it's all said and done, once we get to catchers and pitchers and catchers reporting. So I don't know. But yeah, I it's really hard to quantify the impact of Brant Brown, especially right now. until we actually see, proof of that. So really, it's all just kind of guessing on our parts right now. Colby, do you have anything to add?
We don't know either of these questions. Like, it's impossible for us to know because we don't know if Jorge Soler even likes Brant Brown. So maybe he wants to get as far away from him as possible. Like, maybe this hurt their chances. We don't know. I would feel pretty comfortable saying it probably didn't hurt their chances to getting Jorge Soler, but I don't know if it helped. So I think, it's based on what I've seen. Mariner fans are pretty much properly rating the impact of Brant Brown, in terms of signing Jorge Soler. And I'm sure that Brown does have some, I don't know if it's influence, but he will have some input that will be considered by the front office, because I'm sure, like most, hitting coaches and pitching coaches, the Mariners will send information or send swings or whatever to these guys and ask them, hey, what do you see? What do you like? What don't you like? What do you think you can fix? And do you think this is a possibility for us? Can you help this player? And they'll say yes or no, and the front office will do with that information what they want. So he's going to have some, conversations with Justin and Jerry. I just don't know how impactful those conversations will be in terms of the overall, the choice that is being made. So, yeah, I don't know what Brant Brown's role is going to be in terms of, how much sway he's going to have in acquiring players, or, getting players interested in coming to Seattle when they otherwise wouldn't. My guess would be not a ton, but some. And we'll just see what happens. Like, we won't know Brant Brown is good at his job, like, probably ever, because, he doesn't swing the bat for Luis Urias. He doesn't swing the bat for Cal Raleigh. And we talked about this last year when everybody wanted to fire the hitting coach in May. Like, it was his fault that Eugenio Suarez was, lost bat speed and was hitting 200 with no power. So, coaching in general in baseball, a little bit overrated. Important, but it's overrated by the average fan, and we don't know what Brant Brown is going to do. We don't even really know for sure what his exact role is. We know he's the offensive coordinator, but is he calling fade routes on 4th and 1? Like, I don't know. Like, what is his actual purpose?
He's calling a go ball to Jackson Smith and Jigba from Drew Lock, the 30-yard line.
Is that the thing that Brant Brown's going to do? Is he calling the play, or is he throwing the ball? Like, I think we know the answer. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it certainly seems to be a pretty popular hiring across baseball. Brown, haven't seen anybody say anything negative about him or anything like that. And he is, by most accounts, kind of a mechanical, guru guy. Like, he finds hitches and swings and he can fix that type of stuff. So it's not a bad hiring. I don't know how much sway it has with Jerry and Justin. I don't know if I don't know if it helps, or it probably doesn't hurt with Soler, but I don't know if it helps. So I think, in this particular instance, very surprisingly, Mariners Twitter is probably accurately valuing what a guy can bring to the table.
Yeah. I would say that it's probably not a coincidence that we've heard guys like Jorge Soler and Justin Turner, guys that have worked with Brant Brown in the past, connected to the Mariners this offseason. Does that mean that they're actually going to land those guys, or that they're specifically only targeting those guys because Brant Brown is there, or because Brant Brown has said, I want those guys? I don't know. And does that mean that those guys want to come to Seattle because Brant Brown is there? I don't know. But yeah, Brown's obviously a very well-respected coach, it seems, around baseball. Marlins people seem pretty disappointed that he left to take the Mariners job. And obviously he was a part of a championship coaching staff in LA back in 2020. We'll see if that has any impact on them bringing in some good players this offseason, but so far they haven't done that yet. So, if they add Jorge Soler again, we'll see. If he says Brant Brown was a reason that he wanted to sign in Seattle, I'm sure he'll be pretty open about that and be very willing to say that if he does sign and he meets with the media. But till then, I have really no way to quantify what Brown's impact is, specifically in terms of roster building right now. We're going to answer more of your questions in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and a whole lot more. And the Mariners might not be playing right now, but the Kraken and Seahawks are. So whether the action is on turf or on the ice, whether it's Jared McCann or Geno Smith, you can bet on it all with FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's LOCKDON and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen here on a rare Mailbag Tuesday. Thank you guys for your patience as we had to delay this episode. Appreciate all your well wishes and thoughts and all that stuff that you've sent my family's way over the last few days. So just wanted to say that real quick before we get back into these questions. We got a question here from Alex. Who is a Mariners player you were very wrong about? Could be recent or a long time ago.
For Ty, he won't mention it, so I will for him. Teoscar Hernandez. Ty was way wrong about that one. I was wrong about Colton Wong. So there's plenty of recent.
Long,
AJ Pollock. We were both pretty
AJ Pollock
happy
very
about
wrong
that.
About.
Yeah. Not too many where we were wrong in like the opposite direction, where we're like, oh, this guy's not going to be any good, and then he was. Mostly, this guy's going to be good, and then they weren't. So very optimistic people here at Locked On Mariners, as you can tell. So
sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first word that comes to mind when people see your face is optimism.
I just, I'm dead right about Emerson Hancock. So, if you want to talk about things we were right about, there's one.
Right,
Ty's list will not be that long, but
no,
right.
I was very wrong about Colton Wong. I was very wrong about AJ Pollock. I was very wrong about Teoscar Hernandez, even though he still had a decent year, but definitely nowhere near the year that we had hoped or that I thought he was going to have in Seattle. So I'm just going to retire from making any sort of guarantees or big, bold proclamations. And then we're going to fast forward to next week when they sign Jorge Soler. And I'm going to be like, Jorge Soler is going to have a career year in Seattle.
He's winning the AL home run crown.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, it was a year full of L's for us in 2023.
Yeah. But really, if you're a Mariners fan, like, pick a 2010 player, like a 2010 to 2019 player, you were probably wrong about them.
Yeah.
Probably. I mean, if it's not Felix, Cano, Cruz, or Seager, you were probably wrong about them to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, even with Cruz, I don't know how many people thought he was going to do what he ended up doing in his Mariners tenure. So,
you mean become a Hall of Famer?
Yeah. I vaguely remember, but I do remember the narrative being once he signed, like, oh, he had the career year in Baltimore, and Baltimore is basically a little league ballpark, and hitters come to die in Seattle, and he's old, and all this stuff.
You gave him 4 years. He shouldn't be playing in the outfield. Like, I remember them signing. I was like, oh, this guy's going to hit 250 with like 25 bombs, and it's going to be like, yeah, he was fine, but. And then he was like a MVP candidate, like legitimately turned himself into a guy who has a legit Hall of Fame case. So but those ones are more fun. It's more fun to be wrong about, for the wrong reason than the, what I'm saying.
Sure.
It's more fun to think a guy's not going to be good and then he is. That's fun.
Yeah.
It really sucks. And you're like, wow, Dustin Ackley is going to be 280, 360, 420 and hit 15 bombs with like 30 doubles and 10 triples, and nope, not even close.
Yeah. Sad. Nicholas here wants to know, early this offseason, people projected that good controllable pitching would hold a lot of trade value. Do you still think that's the case this far? Are the M's being picky with the offers they've received, or is the trade market proving their value isn't as high as we thought? I think it's more about how do you supplement the hole they leave in your rotation. And with the Mariners' budget constraints, are they going to be able to properly fill that hole? My guess is no, and that they think that's not a slam dunk, at least, that they're going to be able to accomplish that. So I think they're holding on for dear life to Miller and Woo until they get essentially an offer that they can't refuse, right? Or a trade presents itself that they just cannot pass up on. And I just don't think that that's happened yet, because I think if it did, they would have done it by now. I think there's definitely a price, even with the murky path to supplementing that spot in the rotation. I still think that there is a definitely a deal out there that the Mariners would 100% say yes to on Miller or Woo. That's still like feasible, right? I mean, obviously, like if the Braves were like, "Here's Ronald Acuna for Bryce Miller," of course they're saying yes. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like, like with the Rays, right? If there's a deal there with the Rays that really appeals to the Mariners, that they would still say yes to that, even with the headache that getting rid of Miller or Woo would create.
Right. If the Rays come to Seattle, they're like, "Hey, do you want Yandy Diaz and Randy Arozarena for Bryce Miller?" They're saying yes, and then they'll figure out the rotation later. But yeah, also worth pointing out that the trade market really hasn't gotten going all that much. I mean, we had the big Soto trade, we had the big Glasnow trade, but that's really been it. Like it's been a slow winter. And yeah, we talked about this a lot. There are a lot of teams competing or who think they can compete for a wild card this year. It is a weak free agent class. It's a year where more than half the league is crying poor and either cutting payroll or not committing to raising the payroll. And so you have a lot of teams who have to be very careful with their money. They have to, which means if they trade off their major league roster, they have to go and probably spend money to fill that role, and they don't have the money to spend, allegedly. So I think you're just kind of witnessing a perfect storm here where teams don't want to trade off their major league roster because they think they can compete for a playoff spot next year. Most of the league is crying poor, so they don't want to go out and spend the money on the replacement for the guy they trade. But if you don't want to trade off your major league roster, and everybody else in the big leagues doesn't want to trade off of their major league roster because they think they can compete next year, it's going to make deals really hard to come by. So, but I think that makes your asset even more valuable. So yeah, I don't see the Mariners trading Miller or Woo unless they're blown away. Like I don't you're not getting I don't see the Mariners trading, Bryce Miller for Randy Arozarena straight up. I think they're gonna be like, okay, what else? Because I think the Mariners are more likely to be like, well, we'll just go trade for, Brent Rooker and keep Bryce Miller, or we'll just go trade for Max Kepler and keep Bryce Miller. Right. So yeah, I think it's mostly just because I think the market as a whole right now is kind of waiting for the dam to break. Because like I said, there's very few teams that are willing to spend money. There's very few teams that are, rebuilding straight up. So it's just you have contenders trying to trade with contenders, and you have contenders trying to trade off their major league roster with contenders trying to trade off of their major league roster. It's going to take a while to work out some deals, and somebody at some point is going to have to take that plunge and be kind of the first one to take the risk. That really typically not very Jerry Dipoto-y. He usually likes to wait the market out, see what happens. Unless there's a deal that he feels is a slam dunk, like the Teoscar trade last year. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't think the Mariners overestimated the value of Bryce Miller or Bryan Woo. I think this is just the league as a whole. It's kind of the whole, like, everybody's got their finger guns pointed at each other, waiting for the other person to blink first. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think this is more of a league issue than it is the Mariners overvaluing their player issue.
You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen here on a rare Mailbag Tuesday. We got 3 more questions to go. Here's one from Danny. What's a better trade package? Max Kepler and Jorge Polanco from the Twins, or Ha-Seong Kim and Jake Cronenworth from the Padres? It's the
There's
Padres
no trade
one.
package there.
Well, yeah, that's the whole nother discussion. But within the for the sake of the question here, it's the Padres one for me because Kim is the best player of the four that you mentioned, in my opinion. Obviously, there's a
Sure.
much longer term commitment to Cronenworth. It's like a 7-year deal, but also in terms of 2024 money alone, it's fewer dollars than Kepler and Polanco. Kepler and Polanco are about $20 million. Cronenworth and Kim are $14 million. So from that aspect as well, and also I think that there's a very, very, very good chance that Cronenworth is nowhere near as bad as he was this past year, and that he's a lot closer to being that 4-win guy that he was in back-to-back seasons before this past year. Kim is one of the best infield defenders in all of baseball. Pretty good bat that's starting to come around as well. I really like Ha-Seong Kim, so it's the Padres package, quote unquote, for me.
Sure. If I try and consider like what the actual trade cost would be, I'd probably take the Twins side just
Sure.
because that's going to cost me a lot less in terms of prospects and ammunition, essentially, not just dollars. And if Kim is the best player in the deal, and I think he probably is out of that quartet, then I think it's reasonable to say the next two best players are Kepler and Polanco, just because they're not coming off of a bad season like Cronenworth. So,
Sure.
Interesting quartet. Because you didn't give us any parameters for what the trades would look like, and you just which trade package is better. I don't know. I can't answer that specific question. If you're asking me which duo I'd rather have Kim and Cronenworth. But if the price is different enough, like significant enough, then I would happily take the Twins duo. If the Twins duo if the best player the Twins duo cost me is like, I don't know, like Tyler Locklear, but the best player that the Padres package cost me is Bryce Miller. I'd rather trade Locklear for the duo than Miller for the Padre guys. So
totally. Yeah, no, we definitely have to factor that in. But within the spirit of the question, I like the Padres duo more than the Twins for sure.
Yep.
But yeah, cost obviously matters quite a bit, and I do really like
pretty much the
Polanco
only thing
and
that matters.
Kepler. Yeah, it is. It is.
Can I pick two separate trades and just get Kim and Kepler? Thank you.
Sure. 3-team deal. Why not? Why waste time? Just do it in one fell swoop. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next question here from Ryan. It seems like we've signed/drafted a lot of shortstops the last few years. Who do you think has the skill to stay there, and who has the most potential at the plate? Skill to stay there, Ty Pete. He's the best athlete. And then best bat, Cole Emerson. But I think Emerson's probably going to end up being a third baseman. Arroyo's probably going to end up being a third baseman. Cole Young's probably going to end up being a second baseman. So yeah.
The correct answer is JP Crawford, who we did recently sign. So I'm just saying, if we want to get technical, JP.
Sure.
Yeah, Pete's the best athlete. I think Young has the highest floor, like defensively. Axel Sanchez is interesting, but he's fading pretty fast here.
I didn't even factor him into the equation. So
Bliss is not a shortstop. Like, he can play there in a pinch if you need him to, but he's a second baseman. So it's Emerson, Young, Pete in terms of who's going to be the best defender. I would say I would bet on Pete just because of the athleticism, but like, who do I feel like if I needed to play somebody to play shortstop tomorrow, who would I pick? I would pick Young to play shortstop. I think who has the best shot to stay there? I actually think it's Young, which is kind of weird because I think Emerson is going to move to third. I think Pete is going to end up in the outfield. Like, there's so much athleticism in Pete that I think he's a center fielder long term. And so just by that virtue, I think Young is the best shot to stay there. Best tools defensively though is certainly Pete. Cannon for an arm, great athlete, moves well. But Emerson and Young, I don't think they're moving off a short because they have to. Right? They're not Ty France trying to play third base. Right? They can play that position. It's just they're going to be a little bit better somewhere else, and they'll get to the big leagues quicker that way too.
Yeah. Maybe a better way to answer it is like, who would be the best shortstop out of all? Pete. to me. I think he has the upside to be the best shortstop out of all of them defensively.
Sure, he's got the ceiling.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Last question of the day comes from D. Pankey. Do you think there's a possibility the Yamamoto signing by another club could be the most impactful signing for the Mariners this offseason? You think Jerry may be thinking and hoping a club who loses out on him may be desperate for Castillo or Gilbert and offer a lot? No, because how are you going to replace those guys? Like, I'd be very, very disappointed if they traded Gilbert or Castillo. You would obviously get a lot, and what else do they do after that? I know there's a whole rabbit hole we can go down here with all that. But look at some of the contracts these pitchers are signing right now, and then look at the deal that they just signed Luis Castillo for, and tell me how many of those pitchers that have signed recently you would actually take over Luis Castillo at that dollar figure compared to the dollar figure that Castillo's at. Not a lot. There aren't a lot of them. Luis Castillo is one of the greatest values in baseball right now. That's just fact. Especially in terms of guys that have actually signed like a second contract or a first contract, however you want to look at it, right? Obviously you would get I mean, in theory, you would get a pretty nice package back for either one of those guys. But you have such a strength there. You have arguably the best pitching staff in all of baseball as is right now. I know you desperately need offense, but are you that desperate to possibly significantly downgrade your greatest strength on your roster?
Well, it's like maybe if you how valuable is it to score one more run a game if you're giving up 2 more runs a game?
Yeah,
it's not. And by
that's
the
a
way,
great way to look at it. Yeah,
Castillo is a fantastic bargain. I think it's 5 years, $110 million or something, like incredible bargain. Like he would be the second best pitcher on this market, and he would get $200 million. I really think that. Oh, maybe the only reason he doesn't is because he's 31, so maybe he only gets 7 years and it taps out at 180 ish, something like that. But he's a $200 million pitcher that's making essentially half that. But how many teams in the league are going to want to add $21 million a year pitcher? We just talked about how half of the league is crying poor and saying they don't have money to spend. So you might not get what you need from Castillo anyway. So then it's okay. Now we trade Logan Gilbert. How many teams in the league have the ammunition to come get Logan Gilbert at a price that you are willing to accept?
Yeah,
maybe 1 or 2, maybe.
Yeah.
So I don't think Jerry can trade these guys because I don't think he's going to get proper value. Like for Castillo, the one team that I could see maybe who has the money and the prospect cap or the major league capital, whatever, to get Castillo, probably the Dodgers. Are the Dodgers still going to invest, that heavily into the rotation now that they have Glass now? Maybe, maybe not, but I just don't see the fit because, again, for Gilbert,
well, and what am I getting? What am I getting from the Dodgers that's going to make it worth it? Is Michael Busch really that worth it for me? No, not at all.
No. You'd have to get, and obviously they traded Pepio, so they have fewer pitchers to trade from. I just don't see it. I don't see how you trade either of those guys and get fair value in a straight up deal. To get value in a way that it's obviously your team is better, because even though you took a major step back on the pitching front, your offense, if I'm moving either of those guys, I need 2 darn near for sure everyday bats plus a nice, probably a starting pitcher back in return. And then that kind of defeats the purpose I just don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see enough teams willing to take on Castillo's contract. And if Seattle's eating money, then they've already lost the plot. So could you get Anthony Santander, Austin Hayes, and Gunnar Henderson from Baltimore? Okay, fine. Then you can do that. But
but the Orioles aren't going to spend $21 million on a pitcher.
No, I was talking about Gilbert. But
for Gilbert? Yeah.
Then fine, you can do that. If you get that for Logan Gilbert, go for it. But you're not going to.
Sure.
So I just don't see a way that they can actually move those guys where it makes any sense for this club.
But even with Gilbert and the Orioles too, Gilbert's going to get more expensive.
Right.
Obviously, they can trade him. They can trade him.
Sure.
They wouldn't have any issue doing that. But still,
right. But if you're Baltimore, right, you're not trading Gunnar Henderson for him. Maybe you trade Hayes and Santander. But if you're the Mariners, 1 year of Santander, 2 years of Hayes.
Yeah.
No, it's like, okay, what else are you giving me? Are you giving me Dean Kramer? Like if it's Kramer and Hayes and like, I mean, like I'm not taking Heston Kierstad and Colby Mayo for Logan Gilbert. I'm not taking that for Luis Castillo. So I just don't see any way they can actually get that done.
Yeah.
Like where
Yeah.
it makes any sense for the Mariners. So I think both those guys are staying put. If Seattle does move a pitcher, I think it's probably going to be Bryce Miller, but I'm not too confident they do, and I don't think they have to. I really don't. I think they have enough in the farm system that they can go get a couple of just good, solid bats without having to trade off in their major league roster. They're out there. They're out there. You might have to pay, $1.25 on the dollar, but if that means you get to keep Bryce Miller and Bryan Woo and Logan Gilbert, then just do it.
Yeah, and I think the Mariners are that's kind of what they're hoping to accomplish here, is to build the offense that they need without trading Miller or Woo. Because again, I feel like if they were going to do that, it would have happened by now. And the only way that it's going to happen again is if they get that offer that they just can't refuse, like where it's just too good.
Offer.
Yeah, it's just too good to pass up on. That is going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. Not sure what we're going to be talking about because the Mariners still haven't done anything. So, I mean, there was that report that's like they're the most aggressive or whatever it was on Jorge Soler. So maybe that leads to an actual signing, and maybe we'll actually finally have an emergency podcast to do. That would be nice.
That's a legit source, by the way. So
yeah.
Just because you've never heard of the person doesn't mean they're not a legit source. And
he works for MLB.com, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. He's very plugged into the Cuban baseball scene as well. I know a little bit about his work. It's legit, but it also could be agent speak, right? Like the agent says, "Hey, float this out there for," because the Yankees and Jorge Soler, that doesn't make any sense.
That makes no sense. That's like Albert Pujols and the Mariners a couple of years ago. Hector Gomez.
Imagine paying like Giancarlo Stanton and Jorge Soler like $45 million to be on the
after
same
they
roster.
Just traded for Alex Verdugo and Juan Soto, and they have Aaron Judge, so there's no outfield.
And what I'm really saying is, like, imagine paying Giancarlo Stanton like $27 million to be on your roster.
Right. Yeah.
Those silly keys.
They also have Anthony Rizzo, so there's no first base angle there either. That literally the Yankees make no sense for.
They're also
Rhys Hoskins, for Jorge Soler, for any of those guys.
They're also trying to dump a boatload of money onto Yamamoto. So yeah, I don't think the Yankees are looking for bats at the moment. Not the top of the market bats. Anyways, so we'll see.
Yeah. So that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.